This is a Net News Network headline news brought to you by the Behind the Line podcast, bringing you all the crazy, chaotic news from around the United States and the world. Tune in to what you won't hear the MSN talking about. Well, I warned of this a couple months ago when Biden made this big show of how he had stopped the rail union strike, that this was just a temporary thing, and that most of these guys' demands that they really wanted were not met, like the scheduling and time off issues. So, no surprise now, it's coming back right around Christmas that this strike could possibly happen. This is an article from Fox News. After a fourth U.S. railroad union rejected an agreement with their employers brokered by the Biden administration and reignited fears of a nationwide rail worker strike, one spokesperson for the rail companies claimed they're ready, willing, and able to reach new negotiations. We need to keep the network moving. We need to keep the economy moving, Association of American Railroads President and CEO Ian Jeffries said on Tuesday. And so that's why we stand ready, willing, and able to reach new voluntary agreements. And absent that, we believe Congress might need to be ready to step in, as it historically has. Jeffries' comments come just after a fourth rail union rejected a tentative agreement with the nation's major freight railroads, raising the prospects of a nationwide strike that could kneecap the economy in the middle of the holiday season. Members of the Transportation Division of the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, representing more than 28,000 workers, issued a split decision in the vote count announced Monday. Yardmasters, represented by that union, voted to ratify their contract, but a smaller group of some 1,300 train and engine service members voted against their separate contract. All 12 unions involved in negotiations must ratify their new agreements to avert a potential work stoppage, which would decimate already fragile supply chains in the middle of the Christmas shopping rush. While 8 have already agreed to the deal negotiated by the Presidential Emergency Board appointed by President Biden, a strike could happen as early as December 9th. In October, the AAR had estimated that the strike's disruption to the supply chain would cost the U.S. economy $2 billion a day. While the original agreement gave rail workers a 24% wage increase during a 5-year period and thousands of dollars in bonuses, some unions have voiced concerns about the lack of sick time off. The National Carriers Conference Committee stated, "We have sick benefits, that is true, but to start claiming the benefits, you need to be off 7 days. 7 days without pay." A Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters member previously told Fox Business he recalled one worker who took off 10 days because he had COVID-19 and was paid only $74 over that time. Many workers have to use vacation time in order to get paid for such absences, he said, and it is a sacrifice in their career field. Most guys spend over 230 days away from their families a year, so our vacation is very important, the worker said. My grandfather died, and instead of being with my family, I had to work and use vacation for his funeral. We do not get hardly any time whatsoever. Or you have guys come in sick with COVID because they don't want to lose a paycheck. Jeffries noted that rail companies are continuing to have discussions to identify paths forward with the 4 unions that have rejected the tentative deal. Our employees work 24/7, 365, and do an amazing job moving America's freight and doing it safely. There are tough jobs. These are tough jobs, and that's why they're so highly compensated, and they absolutely deserve the compensation that is included in these agreements, Jeffries said. And that's why it's important we get the last few across the finish line so that our employees can get the compensation they've earned and they deserve for the hard work they do. The other thing is that this article doesn't mention is these guys are on call whenever they're off. So even when they have days off, they're on call. And I've seen that most of them complain that they always get called back into work on their time off, that they can never schedule anything on their regular days off or plan to do anything because they always get called back into work. That's not conducive to family. Being gone almost the entire year is not conducive to family. 230 something days away from home out of 365. It's kind of ridiculous to expect this and not give them time off if they need it, or paid sick time off. And why this was ever agreed to by a union is beyond me. I thought it was the union's job to make sure people were treated fairly and got fair amounts of time off and good benefits and all that. Otherwise, what is the point of paying union benefits? No, Biden just wanted to push this off until after the midterms, because had this strike occurred before the midterms, it would have been devastating for Democrats. So he got them to agree to that temporary deal, getting it through and beyond the midterms, and now it's going to be Christmas time, and this is going to affect shipping and everything else if this happens. So hopefully they can come to some kind of reasonable agreement. The railroad management should be able to agree to these terms. So are you aware that there is a bipartisan report that Congress came out with in October investigating the origins of COVID-19? And in that report, they determined that it came from the lab in Wuhan, China, and that it was like 1,000,000 to 1 odds that it came from a bat in a wet market. And that all the evidence points to the Wuhan lab. And why aren't we hearing about this bipartisan congressional report? I have a copy of that report, planning on doing a podcast specifically on that in the next few days. But it's interesting, there was a press conference on Tuesday. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre snapped at reporters who raised questions about the origins of COVID-19 during this news briefing, which featured outgoing White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci. During questions after the White House coronavirus response team updated reporters on the administration's vaccine efforts, Daily Caller White House correspondent Diana Glebova attempted to ask a question regarding what Fauci has done to investigate the origins of COVID-19. But Jean-Pierre shut Glebova down and rebuked her for speaking out of turn. We have a process here. I'm not calling out on people who yell. You're being disrespectful to your colleagues. And you're being disrespectful to our guest, Jean-Pierre said. I will not call on you if you yell. And also if you're taking time off the clock because of Dr. Fauci has to leave in a couple of minutes. Okay. When Glebova objected, Jean-Pierre said she was done and was not getting into a back and forth with you. It's interesting how adversarial this White House press team or press secretary is with the press. It is the press's job to ask questions of the government. And it's her job to answer those questions and not get pissy and tell people that they can't ask questions. This is a free country, supposedly, and we have the right to question our government. And she has an obligation to answer those questions, especially about things like this. After this, Today Africa news journalist Simone Abeta spoke up and said her question was valid and should be asked. You need to call people across the room. She has a valid question. She's asked about the origin of COVID, Abeta said. It is not your turn, Jean-Pierre shot back. I hear your question, but we're not doing this the way you want it. This is disrespectful. Simone, I'm done. Simone, I'm done. I'm done with you right now. You're taking time away from your colleagues. This lady is a nut. She should not be the White House press secretary. Absolute nut job. Worse than the old redhead we used to have. Fauci, who will step down as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease in December, has faced questions from Republican lawmakers over his agency's support for coronavirus research in China. NEID has provided millions of dollars in grant funding to EcoHealth Alliance, a nonprofit group that GOP critics claim has supported bat coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Lawmakers interested in the lab leak origins theory of COVID-19 want to probe whether that research was the genesis of the pandemic, which it was, determined in this bi-congressional report, and whether Fauci played any role in approving money that was sent to the Wuhan lab. I don't understand why this report is not being brought up, why these reporters don't have copies of it, and why the White House is not answering questions about it. Patty Murray was the Democrat congressperson involved with this bipartisan report. And I can't remember who the Republican was, but of course Murray has no comment about this report after it's come out, and I don't think she participated much in the investigation, but it is what it is, and it determined what it determined. So I think that's nothing that most of us with any common sense already assumed had happened, but here is pretty much the actual proof that that is the origin of the disease. Well, here's the typical story of a politician, and of course this politician happens to be Democrat Joe Biden, but most politicians feel they are above rules and regulations and laws and all this other stuff that they expect us to follow. But part of being a public official is the accounting of your time and who you meet with, and your text messages and records are all supposed to be subject to review, made available to the public if deemed appropriate, but at least there must be a record. Republicans are demanding answers on the lack of transparency on visitor logs from President Joe Biden's Delaware home. The White House has dodged questions on a report that the Secret Service claims to have no records on who has visited Biden's home, where the president has spent more than 25% of his time since he took office. By comparison, the visitor logs to the White House have been released, Fox News reported. Kentucky GOP Representative James Corner said President Biden has spent a large amount of time at his Delaware residence since assuming office. Americans deserve to know who President Biden is meeting with, especially since we know that he routinely met with Hunter's business associates during his time as vice president. The Biden administration must provide transparency to the American people. South Carolina Republican Representative Nancy Mace also demanded answers from Biden over his Delaware visits, arguing that everyone who comes into close proximity with the president in an official or personal capacity is screened by the Secret Service, and that their record of coming close to the president exists somewhere. It's bad if there is official business being conducted and they aren't telling us with who, Mace said. It's even worse, the administration is using the Secret Service to excuse its complete and total lack of transparency. Last month, the U.S. Secret Service admitted that no records exist of who Biden has met with at his Delaware home. The agency said no records exist of those visits, as a New York Post Freedom of Information Act request was denied, Fox News reported. In April, the Secret Service said it did not have any records of who President Joe Biden meets with when he is at his home in Delaware, where he has spent considerable time during his presidency. He has spent around a quarter of his first year as president at his residences in Wilmington and Rehoboth Beach, but not much is known about any official meetings he has had or any lobbying efforts that took place, the New York Post reported. Biden's Delaware trips have cost American taxpayers at least $11 million since the start of his presidency. Biden has made 57 trips to Delaware, spanning all or part of 185 days, according to data from former CBS correspondent Mark Knoller. The trips require taxpayer dollars to fund costs associated with the use of either Air Force One or Marine One, as well as security costs for the Secret Service. The president spends time in Delaware at his homes in Wilmington and Rehoboth Beach. Most of the trips involve direct travel between the White House and Delaware. Biden has made 101 flights between the White House or Joint Base Andrews and Delaware. 71 flights using Marine One and 30 using Air Force One, according to Noller. Public documents from the Department of Defense comptroller show that the Marine One helicopters used by the president cost between $17,065 and $20,206 per hour. The helicopter trip between the White House and locations in Delaware takes roughly an hour, according to the president's schedule. Air Force One's operational costs, buckle your seatbelt, are $177,843 per hour. Almost $200,000 an hour. And the trip to Delaware takes roughly 30 minutes, according to the president's schedule. This puts the total operational costs for the trips, including each method of transportation, at about $4 million. Documents obtained by the New York Post last year showed a Secret Service cost of $1.96 million on the president's first 16 trips to Delaware. A per-trip cost from these data applied to the president's now 57 trips leaves an approximately $7 million tab for taxpayers. Holy crap. That is ridiculous. Why is he making so many trips home when he's the president and needs to be doing the job of president at the White House? That's way too much money being spent by taxpayers for these little trips, and with no accountability on what's going on all these trips. This is your government in action, folks. And it doesn't really matter that it's a Democrat. It could be a Republican, and it would be the same thing. This is our money being just lit on fire and burned. For what? We have a right to know. And like so many other things that are labeled conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat, you're crazy, blah, 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 media denials go on. And all you liberals like to say how something is being made of nothing. Well, guess what? CBS News is finally verifying the Hunter Biden laptop story is true. Wow. It's been 2 years, and they finally have woken up and realized the evidence is overwhelming. CBS News became the latest corporate media organization to confirm the authenticity of Hunter Biden's scandal-plagued laptop on Monday, an about-face from the network that refused to take it seriously 2 years ago. Hunter Biden's laptop, first reported on with less than a month to go in the 2020 election by the New York Post, was widely dismissed as unreliable and even Russian disinformation, a favorite of the liberal idiots, by mainstream print and television outlets. Russia, 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 right, you idiots? In a shocking display of coordination, Twitter and Facebook blocked or limited sharing of the New York Post article on an email contained in the laptop. Twitter even locked the New York Post out of its account for weeks. I mean, these companies should be held liable for the disinformation they've put out. Is it Russian disinformation to block us and tell us that we're tinfoil hats and conspiracy theorists? It has since been authenticated by multiple outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, NBC News, and Politico. And CBS joined the group this week. As Republicans take control of the House, Hunter Biden, the president's son, will be targeted for an investigation, and that means data from a laptop reported to belong to Biden could be crucial to the investigatory process. CBS News has obtained its data not through a third party or political operative, but directly from the source who told us they provided it to the FBI under subpoena. CBS News anchor Tony Dokoupil, said, "We commissioned an independent forensic review to determine its authenticity." CBS News then reiterated what many other news outlets have already reported and declared there is no evidence the laptop was fake or tampered with. CBS News claimed it wanted to cut through the noise and ultimately declared the laptop, which has troves of data, emails, and other possibly damaging information on the president's son, is legitimate. Republicans, according to the report, have pointed to a 2017 email about a proposed business deal with a Chinese energy firm that they say raises questions about whether Joe Biden benefited. The report added, no evidence has emerged that indicates the president in any wrongdoing. Yeah, right. After the report, CBS Mornings anchor Gayle King said perhaps Hunter Biden should have just paid his laptop bill and avoided a lot of trouble. The admission about the laptop's legitimacy is a far cry from previous CBS News reporting on the scandalous computer. It's just crazy to me that this can go on for such a long period of time, and then all of a sudden a complete about face, and it's like nothing ever happened. It's like this is just the way it was. Nobody else was talking about it. They just ignore the stupid crap they pulled for 2 years, all the lies they told the American people for 2 years. This is your news media. I mean, does anybody still listen to the news media, to mainstream news? Why? Why if you do? Because all they do is lie and spew propaganda. And they say exactly what the government, or generally what the Democrats, want them to tell you. It's all propaganda. Here's something concerning that I see coming to America, or possibly. New Zealand's Supreme Court has ruled that the country's current voting age of 18 is discriminatory, meaning Parliament must discuss whether it should be lowered. The case was brought by campaign group Make It 16, which wants the voting age reduced to include 16 and 17-year-olds. A 16-year-old voting. Yeah. This is history. Make It 16 co-director Caden Tippler said the group argued that young people should be able to vote on matters affecting them, such as climate change. The issue must now be brought to Parliament after the court ruled that New Zealand's minimum voting age of 18 was inconsistent with the country's Bill of Rights, which gives people who are 16 years and over the right to be free from age discrimination. The ruling does not mean that the voting age will definitely be lowered. Reacting to the ruling, Make It 16's Caden Tippler told the BBC the campaign had been in an uphill battle, but they had always felt confident that the Supreme Court would support their case. We now have the legal backing for what we've always known. The 17-year-old from Auckland said they had felt frustrated at not being able to vote on issues that mattered to them in the last election in 2020. I became incredibly frustrated. I felt like I knew just as much as the adults around me. Oh, okay. I was more than capable of voting, they said. Following the ruling, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said she personally supported reducing the voting age to 16, but added that it is not a matter simply for me or even the government. Any change in electoral laws of this nature requires 75% of parliamentarian support. Not all parties support the lowering of the voting age. The center-right National Party opposes the move, while the Labour Party is yet to state whether it could support a change in voting age or not. At 16 years old, you do not have enough life experience to make those kind of decisions, just like you shouldn't be making decisions about abortions without your parents' input, or changing genders without your parents' input. All these things they're letting these kids do, except you can't own a gun. And you can't smoke or drink. But I could see the Democrats getting behind this, because I think most kids would support Democrat ideas these days. So that's just more voters for them. And with the amount of rights they are handing over to kids these days without parental input, I could definitely see a push for this in the States. And I think it would be a huge mistake. So these days, reparations and payments and the transfer of wealth is all the rage with the socialist, green, libtards. Well, the climate, it seems, will be no different than all these other things going on. The UN has struck some kind of a deal to pay poor countries basically what amounts to reparations for the damage that the Western world has done to them through climate change. How vague. For the first time, the nations of the world decided to help pay for the damage an overheating world is inflicting on poor countries. But they finished marathon climate talks on Sunday without further addressing the root cause of those disasters, the burning of fossil fuels. This is a story from the AP. The deal, gabbled around dawn, established a fund for what negotiators call loss and damage. It was a big win for poor nations which have long called for money, sometimes viewed as reparations. Yeah, that's what it is. Because they are often the victims of climate-worsened floods, droughts, heat waves, famines, and storms, despite having contributed little to the pollution that heats up the globe. It has also long been called an issue of equity for nations hit by weather extremes and small island states that face an existential threat from rising seas. 3 long decades and we have finally delivered climate justice, said, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this guy's name, the finance minister of Tuvalu. We have finally responded to the call of hundreds of millions of people across the world to help them address loss and damage. Pakistan's Environment Minister Sherry Raymond said the establishment of the fund is not about dispensing charity. It is clearly a down payment on a longer investment in our futures, she said, speaking for a coalition of the world's poorest nations. How much money are we going to have to pay for this now? This is our tax money. Billions of dollars pouring out of this country to these other countries when you have Americans in desperate need. It just boggles your mind, doesn't it? The deal does not address what they claim is causing the warming weather, which is the burning of fossil fuels. It didn't expand on last year's call to phase down global use of unabated coal. Sorry about the phone call in the middle of this. Anyway, the diplomat from Grenada called on the world to move away from fossil fuels, including coal, oil, and gas. It's interesting. What exactly, Mr. Grenada, do you think we should use? And it's easy enough for some tiny little island nation to say they're going to, that also would have plenty of sunshine for solar, I suppose. But that's just not the case in a large country, and we don't have anything significant to move to. So until you have some kind of plan in place, which of course they never put a plan in place, they always just talk about these grand ideas with no plan to actually implement anything. And in some cases they even just cut off the energy that we're currently using, cut it off before anything else is in place to go to. And you're seeing it in Europe right now and in the US with, LPG and people who heat their homes with gas. Even though gas is a clean energy, makes no sense. So in this deal, the fund would initially draw on contributions from developed countries and other private and public sources, such as international financial institutions, while major emerging economies such as China wouldn't automatically have to contribute. That option remains on the table. This is a key demand by the European Union and the United States, who argue that China and other large polluters currently classified as developing countries. I'm sorry, but China is not a developing country, for Christ's sake. Have the financial clout and responsibility to pay their way. The fund would be largely aimed at the most vulnerable nations, though there would be room for middle-income countries that are severely battered by climate disasters to get aid. Martin Kaiser, the head of Greenpeace Germany, described the agreement on a loss and damage as small plaster on a huge gaping wound. It's a scandal that the Egyptian COP presidency gave prostrates such as Saudi Arabia space to torpedo effective climate protection. Many climate campaigners are concerned that pushing for strong action to end fossil fuel use will be even harder at next year's meeting, which will be hosted in Dubai, located in the oil-rich United Arab Emirates. Yeah, you think? I'm sorry, but our government going to these little meetings and agreeing to pay billions of dollars without any input from the American people is just plain and simple wrong. And we can't afford to spend any more of our tax money on these pipe dreams. And the fact of the matter is, you can't pay your way out of climate change. You can't. Money is not going to end climate change. These carbon credits and carbon taxes and all this other crap that they're extracting from us isn't going to change anything that they claim is going on. And if they want to end fossil fuels, maybe they should talk about ending volcanoes too, because frankly, volcanoes contribute the most carbon emissions on the planet and is probably what is causing most of the warming temperatures. This is a simple enough thing to look up for yourself, and so if you don't believe that, you should go take a look. That one volcano in the Pacific Ocean that went off by Tonga last year put up enough carbon emissions into the atmosphere to undo 10 years worth of their, whatever they think they've done to limit climate or carbon emissions in the atmosphere. 10 years. In one day. Do you know how many volcanoes are erupting around the world right now? As of October, there were 47 active volcanoes erupting. There's been 77 eruptions this year of different volcanoes already. And around the world, there are about 1,500 active volcanoes that could potentially erupt. All these volcanoes spewing crap up into the atmosphere at high altitudes where it hangs around for years and causes a dimming effect, a global dimming effect. But you never hear them talk about this or the, natural causes of climate change. And if you look back through history, the Earth has warmed and cooled over and over and over. And then you've got the sun and its relationship to the earth and its the way it changes the climate on Earth. But again, do they talk about this? No, it's all human caused. I'd love for them to explain how humans caused this in the past, before humans. Now, this is just one more way for them to control our money, to take our money, to transfer the wealth. None of this money is going to see these poor people in these poor countries, because it never does. It's just going to go to these other governments or other climate organizations or right back in the back door of these politicians' pockets. It's all about control. It's always about control. So we've had a couple of mass shootings in the last few days. The latest one was yesterday at a Walmart. Officers were called to a busy branch in Chesapeake after a gunman opened fire on colleagues in a staff room. He then turned the gun on himself and died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. There is no clear motive for the shooting. Police have identified the gunman as 31-year-old Andre Bing, and they said he was armed with a handgun as well as multiple magazines. So your 10-round magazine limit would have done no good for this. The guy was an overnight team lead who had been employed there since 2010. So, well, I'll tell you what the motive was. He was mentally ill. That was the motive. And they're going to come up with all kinds of crap, of course, and talk about this, It's like the Colorado shooting at the LGBT nightclub where 5 people were killed and 17 others were injured. And of course, you know, they started down the road of saying that Tucker Carlson and Matt Walsh and all these people are responsible for this Colorado shooting. Some former person in charge at the FBI or former FBI agent was even on CNN or MSNBC saying that a civil suit should be brought against Tucker Carlson for this shooting. I mean, are you kidding me, dude? And then it comes out that this guy that did the shooting is non-binary, identifies as non-binary, and his pronoun is they or them, or I don't even know. But, you know, it sounds like he was one of them. And of course, this just baffled CNN. They said they didn't know what to say about that, because they can't say the usual, you know, that he was some extremist, even though 99% of these mass shooters were not extremists. They're more of the Democrat persuasion. It's always about the guns, you know. It's always that we've got to take the guns away because that'll stop this. That just does not work. Look at these other countries that have taken guns away. You still have crimes being committed by criminals who can still get the guns, or they find other weapons, mostly knives. And even in America, more people were killed with knives than guns last year. I don't hear anybody crying about taking knives away, at least not yet. If you want to stop these mass shootings, then you better start addressing the root problem, which is mental health. The other problem is these Democrats who want to take your guns away also don't want to punish criminals. And almost all of these people have had multiple contacts with law enforcement, have been on the radar of law enforcement. Law enforcement has known something like this could happen with these people, but their hands are tied. They can't do anything about it because of Democrat policies. Are you kidding me? You want to stop these things, then you better take the handcuffs off the cops and let them do their job. If they know some Looney Tune that's got guns is capable of going and doing stuff like this, and there's red flags and whatever else that, you know, indicates something like this is going to happen, then let them fucking do something about it. Instead of allowing this stuff to happen and then crying about it later and how we have to do something. You know, again, this is all about control. They love this chaos because, you know, from chaos comes control. We'll just have more rules, more regulations to keep us safe, you know. It's all about keeping us safe. No thanks. I'll protect myself, thank you very much. And that's what the Second Amendment is for. And that's what a concealed weapons permit is for. I'm not trusting any government official, or cop for that matter, to protect me. Their job is to come clean up the mess after, if they can even do that, because, you know, Democrat policies have made sure that they can't do what they need to do to protect people. Isn't it interesting, too, that all these mass shootings are happening since Biden's come into office? You hardly heard of any of this stuff going on while Trump was president. I'm not a big Trump supporter, but you can't deny the fact that you didn't see a mass shooting every other day on the news when Trump was president. But now that Biden's president and everything's gone upside down and chaotic in the world, all these problems, so many problems, now all of a sudden there's mass shootings every other day. The dude is crazy, and he's driving the country crazy right along with him. It just goes to show that Democrat policies don't work, and they're not good for the country or the economy or the world. Well, now Kim Jong-un's sister, which I didn't even know he had a sister, is warning the United States that it will face a more fatal security crisis as Washington pushes for UN condemnation of the North's recent intercontinental ballistic missile test. Kim Yo Jong's warning came hours after U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield told an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council that the U.S. will circulate a proposed presidential statement condemning North Korea's banned missile launches and other destabilizing activities. After the meeting, Thomas-Greenfield also read a statement by 14 countries which supported action to limit North Korea's advancement of its weapons programs. Kim Yo Jong, who is widely considered North Korea's second most powerful person after her brother, lambasted the United States for issuing what she called a disgusting joint statement together with such rabbles as Britain, France, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. Kim compared the United States to a barking dog seized with fear. She said North Korea would consider the U.S.-led statement a wanton violation of our sovereignty and a grave political provocation. Blah, blah, blah. I think she might be right about her comparison of the United States to a frightened dog, but all talk on both sides, as always. Eventually, that little Fruit Loop in North Korea is just going to fire off every missile he has, and he won't be able to do it anymore because he just launches them all into the ocean. North Korea is just a big distraction from all the other stuff going on with China and Russia and our good old own United States. Aren't you glad that this guy is going away? Dr. Anthony Fauci is sounding the alarm again, contending that the real danger will be among the unvaccinated this winter. Speaking at his final White House press conference before stepping down as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, chief of the NIAID Laboratory of Immunoregulation, good Lord, and chief medical advisor to President Joe Biden, Fauci sounded the alarm, not only urging testing and vaccination, but contending that the real danger will be among unvaccinated Americans. But the people who are at most risk are the unvaccinated. I mean, we have 68% of our population is vaccinated, you know. That means that we have 32% of the population that's not. Also, only about 13% of the country has gotten booster shots, so everybody's pretty much tired of this dude. That data coincides with the findings of a September survey from The Economist, YouGov, indicating that 3 in 10 Americans have not received a coronavirus jab. Fauci, however, cited general data asserting that unvaccinated individuals are more at risk for hospitalization or death. However, he did not mention the growing instances of vaccine-related complications, including the relative incidence of cardiac-related death among males 18 to 39 years old within 28 days following mRNA vaccination, as detailed by a Florida Department of Health analysis, leading the state to update its guidance on mRNA vaccines, recommending against them for men under the age of 40. And if you look at the data, they are just profoundly striking of the curves of death and hospitalization of unvaccinated versus vaccinated and boosted, Fauci claimed, adding, so there is a relatively smaller difference in vaccinated and unboosted versus vaccinated plus boosted. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get boosted. Blah, 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 blah. But the real danger is in the people who have not been vaccinated. So that's where we expect if we're going to see a problem this winter. It's funny that he's also not talking about how so many vaccinated people are getting COVID still and getting sick. It's going to be among those people, he said, echoing early rhetoric from President Biden, who last year falsely asserted that you're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. Yep. Yet at that same town hall, Biden admitted that vaccinated individuals can catch the virus. Months later, Biden asserted that vaccinated individuals could not spread the virus, another falsehood. The twice vaccinated and double boosted president would later go on to contract the virus. Nevertheless, Fauci is urging Americans to get tested for the coronavirus prior to the holidays. It's interesting. And, you know, I see some of these cities are going back to demanding masks. Los Angeles is telling people to mask up again. And, you know, here we go again, right? Round and round we go. Oh, and your government would like you to know that on Thanksgiving, these are some talking points that you should have. The White House on Wednesday distributed leftist talking points for predictably insufferable supporters of President Joe Biden to use for attacking Republicans during Thanksgiving family gatherings. The list of talking points was shared by White House Chief of Staff Ronald Klain on social media. It said, "One last item for your Thanksgiving dinner, some talking points when that uncle comes at you about the president," he wrote on Twitter. This is an actual thing. It's on Twitter. It's called President Biden's Top Accomplishments. Okay. The list tries to argue that Biden is actually tackling inflation, even though the cost of a Thanksgiving meal is up by 20% from last year. It also tries to denounce Republicans in Congress as extreme because of their position on protecting unborn children. The White House document also falsely claims that Republicans want to put Medicare and Social Security on the chopping block and raise costs on Americans by repealing Biden's multi-billion-dollar climate spending agenda. The rest of the list details Biden's government price controls on prescription drugs, his massive infrastructure spending, and subsidizing semiconductor manufacturing as big victories for the American people. It also promotes Biden's gun control bill as a big victory for Americans. The list also boasts that Biden rallied the world in defense of Ukraine in the face of Vladimir Putin, despite his failing to prevent the war from starting in the first place. You know what, folks? Go to Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time with your family, regardless of what they think or believe politically. You can still get along with somebody just because they disagree with you. You don't have to act like the left acts and hate somebody because they don't think the way you do. I would say don't even talk about politics at Thanksgiving. There are plenty of other things to talk about with your family and friends besides politics or trying to start some kind of argument. It's an argument that cannot be won. You're not going to sway anybody, so it really doesn't matter. People are so entrenched in the way they think that it's no use. But that doesn't mean you can't be friends or love somebody or still get along with somebody or spend time with them. They are your family. We need to stop hating each other because we think differently from each other. Family is family, and that's exactly what the Democrats want, is to tear families apart. So don't fall into the trap. Don't do what they're telling you to do and start some arguments with people. It's not worth it. Don't give them what they want. They want to tear families down. They want to tear these families apart. They want everybody hating each other. So just be the bigger person. Agree to disagree. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. I hope you remember what to be thankful for. This is still America. This is still a good country, regardless of all the terrible things going on. I wish you safe travels if you're traveling, and be safe out there. Enjoy your time off. Happy Thanksgiving, folks. Thank you for listening to Net News Network Headline News, brought to you by the Behind the Line podcast. For more, you can listen to us at the BehindTheLinePodcast.com or right here on Net News Network. We can also be found on Facebook, YouTube, Truth Social, Parler, Gab, Twitter, Telegram, Reddit, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, and anywhere else your favorite podcasts are found. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and share.